This video is going to discuss how to graft stitch patterns like this, where you have a combination of knits and purls in a cable pattern, so that when they are grafted, the pattern continues on either side of the grafting. And it requires that instead of knitting two pieces and then grafting them at the top, that you begin the project with a provisional cast on of some sort, and there are several different varieties. In my blog I have them listed. And then you leave the stitches live. Now this is the top part, and the reason I know that is I've left this little yarn butterfly so that I don't mistake it for the bottom, because sometimes it can get confusing, because knitting can look the same when it's upside down, although it's not. So I want to know where my top is, I want to know where my bottom is. Now the first thing I need to do when I'm doing a pattern like this, where there is a pattern repeat, is I want to, when I do the provisional cast on, I want to start with row 1 of that repeat. And I want to end one row less than the pattern repeat. So in this particular cable pattern, the final row would be to work on the wrong side across to the other side. But my grafting is going to provide that row. And so I don't want that additional pattern row, because it will mess up the pattern. It'll be too wide. I want it to look like this, where it's joined, and it would make that a little longer if I did it. Now what I need to do before I start is I need to look at my provisional cast on and notice something very important. It has one stitch less than this side. And when you graft, you know that you need to have the same number of stitches on both pieces, or it's not going to work right. Well, that's easily done. I need to just kind of create a stitch at one of the two ends, but I need to look at this first to see which end I want to create it at. And I've got let's look at it in this direction. I've got 4 stockinette stitches here. 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 1, 2, 3, 4 stockinette stitches, although it kind of looks like it ends. It's between those two. And I've got 2 purl stitches, 2 knit stitches, and so on. Now at this end, I've got 3 stockinette stitches instead of 4. And if I were to start my grafting now, I would be trying to match up 3 stitches against 4 stitches, and it would give that offset that you see if you're not using this technique. So what I want to do before I do anything else is I want to just kind of create a stitch at the end. And this is pretty easy. You just, find any kind of loop in the selvage, and there I go. Now I'm ready to roll. Now, what I plan to do next is I plan to pause this, and I'm going to thread up some needle, and then we will get into how this is. If you've grafted before, you know the language that is used is, or you've used Kishner, the shorthand is knit on, purl off, knit on, whatever, depending on the circumstances. And what that means is that I am going to be inserting my needle knitwise or purlwise, and I'm going to either be leaving the stitch on the needle or taking the stitch off the needle. And in the blog that accompanies this, and in the article, this video is actually going to accompany an article in Cast On in the series Special Topics in Finishing. It will be described ad nauseum how to do this, the purl on, purl off, in the various circumstances. But in the video, I'll demonstrate it, but you may want to refer to my blog. That will be at the date will be like June 29th or 30th, 2020. Or look at the fall issue of Cast On under the Special Topics in Finishing article. Now, it's easy to get confused, and if I started the grafting right now, notice that I've got like half stitches here. And yeah, that's a knit stitch, 1, 2, 3, 4, but I always find it easier to work from the end where the top of the piece is on needle 1, and that's how this is going to be referred to, and it's referred to in most instructions. And the cast on edge is needle 2. That just makes it a little easier to me. Now, when you're going to be grafting a piece like this where I've got multiple types of stitches. I've got knit stitches, purl stitches. You use a different preliminary step. And I actually want to that's a little stitch I created. I just want to reorient it because that's how I roll. And the first step, the preliminary step, is on needle 1, which is here. I insert the needle purlwise and I leave it on. So that is actually a purl on. And I want to make sure when I'm grafting, and this applies to any kind of grafting, that I keep my yarn below the needle. If I go up here and start grafting, I'm going to have a yarn over and it's going to be a mess and look ugly and I'll have to start again. Okay, so there's my first step. And because I'm using a different color, because I want to demonstrate this, normally I would be using the project yarn. In fact, I would have left this tail much longer and used it. I am going to leave a tail so I can weave it in when I'm done. So that's step 1. The next step is to insert the needle purlwise into the first stitch on needle 2 and then to drop it. So that would be a purl off. Going to drop it, and then the next step is to insert the needle into the next stitch knitwise, and that would be a knit on. Okay. Now, from here on out, what we do depends upon what type of stitches we have together. This is a knit stitch, this is a knit stitch. So it's basically regular old Kitchener, and regular old Kitchener is knit off on needle 1, purl on, and I'm not worrying too much about this yarn, I'm going to clean it up, neighbor. And then on needle 2, purl off, knit on. The next thing I do is I look at my stitches. I've got a knit stitch and a knit stitch. Same old thing. Knit off, and you want to be careful you don't split the yarn because that is a nightmare. Purl on, then purl off, knit on. And if you think I'm doing this from memory, well, for Kitchener I probably am. But for the rest of these steps, I have my cheat sheet, and the article in Cast On and in my blog, I will have the cheat sheets there for you. Okay, again, knit, knit, knit off, purl on, purl off, knit on. Okay, now what do I have? I have a knit stitch and a purl stitch. And if I want this to align properly, I can't do the regular old Kitchener because that's not going to work. I have to go with my instructions for a knit with a purl next to it. And the first step is the same. I knit off, but instead of purl on, I knit on. And what that's going to do is give the right orientation for this purl stitch that I've got next. Okay, now on the second needle, I knit off and I purl on. And again, you really need to have the cheat sheet with you unless you have a fabulous memory or you do this all the time. Now I have 2 purls together. Purl, purl, and the purl for reverse stockinette on the purl side is just the reverse of the Kitchener stitch. So it's purl off, knit on, and it is knit off, purl on. Okay, now what do I have? I have a purl and a knit stitch. So I look at my cheat sheet and it tells me that for needle 1, I purl off, purl on. So I purl in both directions. On the second needle, needle 2, I purl off and I knit on. And if I actually had a better memory, I could probably sit and plan this. Okay, now I'm at the point where I have 2 knits, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause this and clean this up a bit so you can see what it looks like. Okay, I've cleaned up part of it so that you can see that I have my knit stitches, my 4 knit stitches are all lined up, and then my purl stitch. And when I say clean up, what you do is you just shift the yarn from this side to that side, and that is going to clean it up. Now, what you want to do when you're cleaning up is you want to try and match the size of the existing stitches. That's the whole purpose. And if you've done Kitchener before, you know that that's the goal. And there we go. Pull that. You don't want to pull too tight, because if you pull too tight, or you do what I just did and didn't shift it properly, you wind up with some gloppy looking stitches. And so you don't want to do that. And there we go. Now, that is basically it. So you're going to have a situation where you've got knit stitches all together like this. I use regular Kitchener, where you have a knit next to a purl stitches, and then a purl next to a knit. So there are 4 things you can run across here. And it's just not that complicated. What I'm going to do is pause the video again, and I'm going to work the rest of these stitches so that we can see what it looks like when it's done. Okay, I've pretty much finished, and I'm down to my last couple of stitches. Whoops, sorry about that. And I've got 2 here and 2 here, and I've already worked the front needle, and so I'm going to purl off and knit on, because I'm working in Kitchener, and then I'm going to knit on, purl off, and what I'm going to do to finish up is I've got these 2 stitches on the needle, is I'm going to purl off, and then I'm going to knit on, and I'm all done. Now, rolling needles, you can see that, now you can see that the stitch pattern is maintained. I've got knits here, purls, and they're lined up pretty well. Now, the thing I need to do to finish this up is to clean it up, and I'm not going to take time to do that right now because it's just the same old thing. I would go in and pull it off. But I actually, as we do for all of our finishing special topics and finishing articles, we have a project that goes along with it. And this project is an infinity scarf worked in a very lightweight, lovely alpaca. And I want to point out that you need to, reduce your expectations sometimes, particularly if you've been working on this for a while and one end is a little dirty. Washing will help that. And also, with this kind of yarn, it tended to just get kind of messed up the more I did it. And so it is going to be more noticeable. Now, it's not as noticeable as the seam, which is your other option. And the pattern does a line across. So I'm okay with this. But when I'm learning to do this, I don't want to learn to do it on my final project like I did on this, because it can be kind of messy. What I want to do is work up a test swatch and practice it there in a nice worsted weight wool that's not going to be a pain to deal with. But that is this technique, and as I said before, the written out instructions will be in the article in Cast On, which Cast On is the official publication of TKGA, and members have access to it. And it will also be in my blog for the end of June 2020.